Good afternoon. It is Friday, first session after lunch. um, some people are, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Good afternoon. So this is Bangkok, 1 p.m. We should get going. This is SML. If you're in the wrong session, please be aware. So yeah, I'm Alexei. My co-chair, I think, is sick, so I'm flying solo this time. Note well, we're still at IETF meeting. This session is covered by Note well and various procedures and code of conducts, etc. Murray, I thought you just have to sit at the front in every email session. So and a reminder about code of conduct: be respectful, use best technical judgments, don't attack the person, attack technical arguments. This session is being recorded. If you are local, please either use on-site tool, you can use the full video link as well. In this case, please make sure that you are muted and your video doesn't show. We have a note taker. Thank you very much. Agenda. So everybody gets so excited about vacation notices, so we're going to talk about them first. And then we're going to have longer discussion about base spec.
As of this meeting, I am no longer your area director. Andy should be here. I just left him upstairs and said he was going to come and introduce himself as his new area director, although many of you already know him from other working groups. But thanks for the hard work over the time that I've had you, and I'll be in the back.
Thank you for chartering us. Yeah, I hope you don't regret it. Yeah, exactly. Oh, here he is. Yeah. We just have a running joke of Murray sitting in front of all email groups. You know, it's just, you know. He designed it that way. Yeah.
I've always got a chair.
Okay. Any agenda bashing? No, in this case. I have to be the clicker because clicker doesn't work. Okay.
All right. Hello, everybody. Yep. So you saved the best session for last, hopefully. Thanks everybody here taking the effort on the last day, being still awake and everything. But I can promise you, I mean, vacation notice is something you'll soon return home, so something you will deal with anyway. So maybe you learn something practical, or maybe optimize your next IETF experience dealing with, people mailing you. Okay, next slide. So yeah, what are we talking about here? So this draft, which by the way, I think got adopted in the meantime since the last meeting,
Yes.
because we did it afterwards. Yeah. And just for those that may not have been following the working group, so tightly, this is actually one very particular use case for SML. We will see the core spec discussion afterwards. And this use case basically builds upon a common practice you have in email, which is vacation notices are out of office notices as an alternative label for that. So many of you might know them from your favorite email program or have them set up even while being here at the IETF. There is a running example implementation. It's not updated super frequently, so it might not be on the very latest, format of the draft. Since IETF 1.1, there were some minor changes in the actual document, but for today, next slide, please. We will. Okay, sorry. Okay. This is just to reiterate for those of you that don't know how it looks like. So this on the left side is just a very normal user interface from Roundcube Webmail, which is a very popular web mailer. And you see this is how you basically do an out of office notification in that. And on the right hand side, you would see how that is converted into actual CIF rules, which are basically the technical basis on which Roundcube does that. This is just for illustrating that the beauty, I would say, of this use case is also that you can, from a user side, just reuse the existing, everything you do already with the vacation notice in order to get them set up. You can leverage for free. There is no extra input for the user to do because just the system can basically, from the data you put in, generates this structured vacation notice, which the receiving client can then understand, because the magic is only happening in the transformation to the actual CIF message where the structured data is included. And next slide. So on the receiving side, if your client would receive such an out of office message, this is just suggestions how that might be looking like. So the client could highlight that in a way that the user who mailed you is absent, or even the client might tell you, like, Werner is not in office currently. There might be a colleague assigned with maybe a phone number or another email, and you could just enact on that. So that's just the basic idea of this. That you don't just get a text message saying Werner is not in office and noting some information beyond that, but that your email client might be able to understand that information and give you some actionable options, like to call that person, reroute that email, these kind of things. Probably even saving it to the calendar to remind you, when the vacation is over. Next slide, please. Okay, so the main content of the discussion today, there were some points actually raised in the Dublin meeting, which were basically the question of, there was an observation, like there is this basic out of office model, like you have seen here in Roundcube, which is very similar to the one you have in Outlook, in Gmail. It's basically a very similar model all over the popular email systems. But there was some observation and some proposals by some people that there might be small variations from that, or potential extensions. And there was a little bit the question, should those be included? So should we consider that for the draft, or should we just finish the draft and have it ready? Yeah. So the discussion was, I think, a little bit a split. So I think if I summarize correctly, there were also some discussions on the aisle afterwards. So some people were rather like, keep it simple, whereas some people were like, okay, that would be also interesting to consider some additional stuff. And so today's presentation is a little bit about making up the mind about these discussions and probably proposing a way to balance the situation and get the draft done in a way while keeping it still simple. The discussion was basically around three different kind of things. So one was about the current actual model of vacation notices, how you have that in most tools is just a single absence, like I'm at IETF this week, but assuming you would be on another conference just after being back for 3 days, leaving for another conference, this is something you cannot model at the same time. You can only have one absence configured at a time. But it might be interesting for people, trying to contact you, that you are just there for 1 day and then again away. The second thing was, what is the difference if you talk about not people but services being sending an out of office notice? We will see some examples for that later on. And in a broader sense, there is also the question about not just being out of office, but about I phrase it here, mailbox status. Like sometimes you get a message like a certain person is no more working in that company. So this is before the email address is probably deactivated fully. You sometimes have a grace period in some situations that some companies will for a couple of weeks or so still have the mailbox active. And you get kind of an out of office message, which is actually rather a message that the person you're mailing to is no more in that position or company, and you should mail to somebody else. So it's very close actually to an out of office message. Actually, out of office messages are used for that. The question is, if we now try to describe that in a machine readable format, should we, adapt it in a way so that the client understands the implication of that? Because it might be different from just a temporary absence. Next slide, please. So this table is a little bit an attempt to think about these three things. What would they mean actually in terms of current implementations of people that would try to adopt that? And that's of course a very subjective rating and open to discussion in a way. But thinking about it, this whole idea of multiple periods of absence sounds a little bit complicated. Also, if you think about how you would put that into a user interface, like saying I'm, here and there a couple of days and then this and that and so on. And also in terms of how to present that from the receiver side. In terms of vacation notices for services, that's probably not even something happening in a regular email client, but might also be something sent by a ticket system or whatever kind of system is basically replying on your, info@company or something like that address. And of course, it depends a little bit on how much information to put in that structured data on what that would mean on the receiving end. For the mailbox status, actually, it would not differ anyway for people, but it might be, quite easy. For instance, for that case, I mentioned a person left the company or something like that. That would again rather something not defined, in a user interface by user, but maybe something defined by an administrator or something like that. So that could be reasonable in terms of how to deal with that. So that's a little bit was the idea of which of those might be worth considering further in terms of proposing something for the document, because none of these things are now in the document. So the discussion probably today will be a little bit about what do people think, what should we add to the document or should not add to the document.
So the implication of multiple periods being complex, are you recommending we don't do this?
So I even didn't prepare a slide for that.
Well, that's what, yeah. I vaguely remember you didn't. That's why. Yeah.
So the question is if we want to discuss that now, or if people can, if we do it at the end, I don't know. Of course, I mean, if people think that makes still sense, we can, of course, also think about how to do it.
Any comments on these features that people want to do on the spot, whether to do or not do them? Okay. Personally, I think not doing multiple periods based because they're complex, that sounds fine. But okay. I mean, again, we can revisit this if people really want it. So.
I mean, still, even if we don't talk about it today, if people come up with it, I mean, as long as we didn't finish the whole thing, we can think about it. Okay, so then getting to that second aspect, what would actually a vacation notice for a service mean? Yeah, so if the absentee is not a human being, but probably something like a legal entity or something like that. And currently, if you observe practice, I mean, this is actually something which is reusing the human intended vacation notice already quite often. So you might have experienced your message to some service, your haircutter, your lawyer, your favorite restaurant, and you might just receive a very normal out of office response saying like, we are in holidays, something like that. Yeah, so that is to a certain extent something where you just can reuse existing kind of vacation notices, obviously. But there might be some cases actually where you could have some kind of improvement. So for instance, for the classic vacation notice, something we have in the current draft already as a model is this idea of a replacement person. Because typically if you write to a corporate person or so and receive that out of office notice, you might get a message like Robert is currently traveling at IETF, but you can talk to Peter from Fastmail, who will be happy to help you in the meantime, right? So this idea of what we call a replacement person. In the case of services, this might be a little bit more extensive. So imagine you're a doctor, and at least it's in Germany, it's a case that doctors who are on vacation typically have some other doctor on duty which they refer to, they refer you to, right? So even if you call them at the weekends, they will tell you on the recording, like, please get to this doctor. He's the doctor on duty for that kind of weekend. So the basic idea, therefore, is here to basically allow as a replacement person, or to generalize the idea of how it's called currently in the model, from a replacement person to a more generic kind of replacement, which would allow services, for instance, to put in a doctor's information there, maybe even including something like a postal address or a phone number and so on. And the nice thing is you could just reuse stuff from schema.org here. So that would be a very small change actually to the current model, and would even make it less specific to a certain extent. So the question is, so if you would say like, this replacement entity now in the new model is either a person or an organization, one thing you might still want to is for the actual individual users that are absent to maybe restrict the number of, or to tell them not to put probably everything in there, because from a data sharing perspective, I might not want to put the address in there of the person replacing me at work. That at least some, so there's a risk probably of oversharing here a little bit. But in general, I think that would be the suggestion to allow here the schema.org person or organization types where there are subtypes even for certain professions already, which could help your email client understand what's going on. The second suggestion is actually there is already within schema.org, and actually a similar thing exists in OpenStreetMap and other systems. There is a very simple notation for something like opening hours. Yeah, so different from a normal. Actually, even a normal human person might have something like opening hours if you think about part-time workers, right? So, for instance, if you're at the moment a part-time worker and you want to write an out-of-office message for the part of the day where you're not in the office, that's something you can actually not really well do in current implementations, because you only can, you can do in some systems like Exchange, you can have hours, but you would need to reconfigure it basically every day because you cannot put there any kind of logic inside. And this opening hour schema, which is, as I said, already used in schema.org, and therefore on websites, you can find it for restaurants and services that advertise it on their websites. They can have this kind of formal description in which they say, okay, basically these and these days are our opening days, and these are the hours. So basically the idea here is to allow that to be included also in the structured vacation notice, so that a client that can parse this might be able to tell you not that the restaurant is absent or something like that for a whole while, but you're just writing outside of the opening hours. Yeah? So this would be basically the two suggestions for the vacation notice for service. I think I have an example. I'm not sure if there's a slide in between, so maybe you can shortly sneak. Yeah, so exactly. So you see it here already. It should be highlighted actually, but the color is hard to see here. So you see the opening hours thing as an example there, and you see the person thing there. So as part of that, actually, the question is a little bit, this whole type was called out of office information before. Yeah? So there would also be the suggestion in order to make that feasible to just rename it to something like, and that's open to discussion, like unavailability information or so, because out of office sounds a little bit, officey and people-wise. Otherwise, it's not a big change here. And probably also replacement is not the perfect wording. So if anybody has a suggestion here, like alternative or something like that, that would also be interesting. A slight change in the model here, as you might remember from the draft, as you find it online. Basically, the replacement is a is one object with a topic and then like name and email address or so. So this is now a little bit nested in order to leverage that schema.org person or organization kind of entity. So you see the topic is on a, so there's a replacement object consisting basically of a topic, which helps you to understand if you have multiple replacement persons, you know, this is for project A, this is for project B. Nested in that is actually the person and organization.
Okay, thank you. Michael Richardson?
When we started discussing this, I of course thought, you know, I'm currently at IETF 122 is what it should say, right? And my question was, does opening hours allow us to put a time zone in?
Good question.
Because I think that many people, when they put the vacation messages, I'm going to IETF 22, the point was, I'm not available in your time zone, office hours,
right,
but I still have office hours. I'm just 12 hours away from you.
Okay, that's even a twist of the, you know,
personal. So don't expect me to answer your, because some people are like, oh my God, I didn't answer your email within an hour.
Right.
And, and I'm like, email doesn't work that way, but some people think it does. And so that's actually the message to them that I'm sleeping, so go away.
That's actually a good point. So from as I said, this is from basically the schema.org business annotation, where I guess it's rooted in locality. So I'm pretty sure they just omit the time zone thing there. But as soon as you put it on persons which may be moving, or maybe
or restaurants for that matter, right? Because I'm sending email maybe in Eastern Canada time zone to the Thai Bangkok restaurant, and they're like, well, I don't want to. We're not open at 7 a.m.
Exactly.
Eastern.
Exactly. I mean, even though for the restaurant you might still have an address where you could infer that, but it's of course a dirty hack.
It's McDonald's, so I mean it's universal.
Yeah. So it makes total sense, I think, to consider adding a time zone information here. Good point. Other than that,
I'm just responding to your question about renaming draft. It's like, just leave it be. I think even though vacation notice might not be exactly what you're describing because it's set of related thing, I think it's a well understood term.
Right.
So even services related responses in vacation notice style is still, well, at least I think most programmers understand that that's the same type thing. Okay, Ben?
I think we have to pay attention here for feature creep because especially like when you talk about time zones and intraday availability, I think this is a very different use case than what vacation is. Vacation is very well understood. It's something that's typically more than one day. And it means that I'm not available at that entire day. And it's usually so basically if you make an assumption that an email will typically not be answered in less than one work day, or the expectation cannot be made that an email needs to be answered in less than one work day or within the office hours, then I think a lot of these cases can become a lot less complex, much easier to model, and I think also fits better with what people expect, because frankly, I don't want to have an email just because you can't answer in the next few hours. It's fine if you answer in next day. That this is what email is, and I think there needs to be a certain limit on what we're trying to do here, because if we're saying we model every unavailability, then we come into things like sending emails because I'm at lunch, and I don't think we want that.
Just as a very short comment on this, I think we had in Dublin also a meeting before the discussion about, because the very initial model was actually day-wise, like you propose, but somebody stood up and said, like, actually in Microsoft Exchange, you can do it hour-wise.
Yes, and I'm saying I specifically disagree with that. I say we should not go to hours at all. That makes a lot of things much easier.
Which would make us incompatible with the Microsoft ecosystem, though. So I think at that point, there was an agreement to basically at least allow this kind of granularity, which is why it is currently in the draft. Just saying.
Yeah, I understand. I think Ben can disagree,
Sure,
and,
yeah.
and we might decide that
I just wanted to remind
he's in a rough because most people want it. But I think his point about complexity and keeping it simple, I think it's good comment. You have 14 seconds left. Do you want to take a bit more on this? I'm happy to.
Yeah, I think the time was quite short.
Because I think you probably that the presentation is not going to take as much as I originally.
All right. So the second thing is what I already said before as a mailbox status information. Yeah, as I said, there is actually some cases which are quite similar to this vacation responses. And I think one thing very many people will be aware of is these no reply email addresses, which basically mean you should not answer to that, or if you do it, you will get something like an automated response saying this is actually a no reply email address, which is sort of like, you can consider that as sort of a permanent absence in a way, right? So this is like an unattended mailbox in a way. And I made the example before, there might also be messages that are returned for mailboxes which are permanently available but not no reply. So something like a person left an organization which basically shut down, like a doctor who retired or something like that, and might want to recommend another one, and these kind of cases. So again, as I said before, these cases are already used sometimes together with these vacation notice model we have currently around, or with a feature. And the question is, could we probably refine or slightly improve the structured data which we would propose as part of the structured vacation notice? And the suggestion here somehow would be to add a property to the structured vacation notice, which basically defines something like an unavailability type, where the default would be corresponding to the actual vacation notice as it is. That this is a temporal absence, so I'm on vacation. Yeah. But at the same time, maybe allowing other stati, like for instance, something like permanent unavailability, no reply, as something like kind of a read-only mailbox, and maybe something like moved as well, if or soon to move, which means like a person maybe is a company is rebranding and that mail address will change, something like that. So it's basically a redirection to one own or to a new email address. Yeah, that's basically the idea. There is a little bit of related work here, especially if you think about bounces and so on in RC 3263, even though those are more on the very technical level. So I think this is more like on the conceptual level, where you want to send a valid response to a communication partner about providing or conveying some information about why a certain mailbox, why you receive an automated reply and likely won't get a reply from a human anytime soon. Yeah, so this again would be an optional extension, so it would not much interfere with the actual human vacation notice, because we could just assume the temporary value as a default. But for cases in which you would like to, convey additional information, you could set that property. And so one interesting thing here could be if you think about the no reply case. So to my knowledge, this is currently not formally standardized somehow. So there's just a convention, like if a message if a mailbox is labeled no reply at service, this is somehow trying to teach the user you should probably not reply to that message, but it's not prohibiting you. So at least I don't know of any mail client which will disallow you or at least warn you when you try to reply to that message. But if you remember, as part of this draft, we see also this option, what we call a preemptive vacation notice, which means you can optionally already send to people information about your absence as part of a regular email. So as you think, like, no reply messages are typically used to send you a transactional message from a service, from an automated service. You could use this kind of preemptive annotation in that email to teach the email client, first of all, it doesn't make so much sense to reply to that email, and you might want to remind the user to do so, because everything that will happen otherwise is that the user might take time to write a lengthy email just to receive an actual out of office thing in the end. Yeah? So that's, I think, a very good case for this preemptive kind of information. Plus, many of those services where you have this no reply email addresses still will allow you to contact them somehow. Yeah, so they will just not attend a mailbox, but they may attend another mailbox, or they may attend a phone support or something like that. So you could again use this replacement mechanism in order to say, okay, you cannot reply to this mailbox, but this is actually our phone number or our website where you can get additional help. So this is why I think this might be, even if it's extending the scope a little bit of the initial, vacation notice, I think that could be a worthwhile extension, which probably doesn't make too much of a confusion for the, base use case.
In the chat, me and Ben said that this seems quite usable. So me and Ben said in the chat that this is quite usable.
Okay.
So +1.
So an open question, I mean, would be, as I said, you see there is some ... So the question is how many, or which, do these distinctions, how they are here, make sense already, or do we need a little bit of shuffling around that?
Related question from this. Sorry, I'm being participant here. Sounds like we need the registry, right?
That could be an option as well, right?
I mean, it doesn't have to be IANA registry, but at least, you have a list and then you decide,
What would be a non-IANA registry, actually?
Just a table and a draft. That's what I mean.
You mean for the time of the, before the draft is...
yeah. If we decide that the set is, cannot be extended, we
sure.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. Yeah.
All right.
This is partially saying that IANA registry might be overkill, but maybe not.
Okay.
Well, we can find out.
All right.
Okay. Moving on.
If there's no more comments on this.
Any other comments on this? Are we all excited about Friday?
I think so.
Okay.
Brings
Well,
us-
yeah.
Yep.
Ben in the chat, applause. Right.
Okay.
I think some support, but obviously we'll still need to take this to the mailing list. So
sure.
From this co-chair, I think you can just assume that you do this, add this to the draft and mention it on the mailing list.
Right.
And if people object, then you can take it out.
That's fine. Thanks. All right, so this is just just for illustration, a minimum viable example of how a no reply would look like. I was actually expecting some people to stand up and say, okay, this no reply in general is something that anyway, it's a little bit of surprise that was never somehow attempted to do. So you could, of course, also do that in a header or something like that. So that wouldn't necessarily need to be an SML related thing, right? Sure. So the question probably also to the group would be, would still an additional header also make sense for some cases where you would, as an MTA or so probably, or as a client, not want to expect the full message before making that kind of information on the no reply, or maybe even on one of the other cases. In any case, I still think it makes sense also to have that in the structured email annotation, just because of what I said before. In the no reply, you could convey additional information. You wouldn't probably want to stuff all that in a header, unless we decide to put SML in the header in total. I think there were discussions about that as well in previous meetings, in some cases. Yeah. So I don't know if there's any point on this or any opinions.
Philip Hallenbaker. Well, he's here, but saying that so many times he gets no reply, and then he gets a reply from this.
Okay, maybe we need a separate category, maybe reply or something. Yeah, maybe. There is a chance. Okay. I mean, still, I would not say the email client should really prohibit it, but maybe show a hint, because not everybody, it's also a language thing, right? I mean, no reply wouldn't mean anything to everybody everywhere. I'm not sure. I never saw actually a German version of no reply. So even in Germany, it's no reply. I'm not sure if anybody can share from another language area in France. Is it also no reply? Does anybody know? Would be interesting. Yeah. Okay. Okay. If there's no more, we can. I think we should be through actually. Should be summary slide, right? Next steps. Okay. So yeah, Alexei already said, I think we may put at least the second thing for discussion in the draft. Probably also we will circulate the other point on the list again. I think overall, the actual specification at least is, I think, the you know, where it starts, where it ends. I think there's not much more than what we discussed today in the room. So it's, I think, probably basically nailing down the final nits and bolts here. It's even possible already to implement that right now without even doing any harm. So I told you we did that in Roundcube webmail. It doesn't even do harm because, you know, email clients which cannot deal with that, they will just happily ignore the structured data included. Yeah. So maybe even as an idea for people to even try already experimenting with that. Maybe we will put some more documentation around our Roundcube implementation, so it's easier for people to do that. Yeah, of course, happy also for other feedback or ideas. Otherwise, we go on. Yeah.
Right, sounds good. So this is your ideas. You haven't implemented in the draft yet, right?
Sorry again.
You haven't implemented this in the latest published.
Not
draft.
yet. The things we presented today, right?
Okay, fine.
But they should not be too difficult to add, actually. So I will probably do that before.
In absence strong feedback, I think you add them and send a message to the mailing list.
Okay.
And send a separate message after you post the draft to kind of alert people. So
right.
Sounds good. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Swapping hats. Okay. Base spec.
All right. Here we go. I guess I start, or you want to say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
So base spec. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, base spec. Okay. That's the main document of the working group.
This is still Hans York, you know, in case you haven't.
It's, so yeah, the scope is this is the main spec. There is part of an example implementation also for Roundcube. You cannot see too much with this respect. I mean, it's actually underlying the structured email use case, of course. So it's sort of related to the same prototype. Since IETF 1.1, there was a new draft revision with some changes. I think I described them on the list already. We also had an interim, I think some 4 weeks ago now, which I think was quite productive. And there was actually in Dublin a lot of discussion about compatibility tests. So basically the question was, if we start putting structured data into email, how much will this be downwards compatible with existing clients? So will it confuse clients in a way? So people demanded, first of all, some testing with respect to that. I presented it in the interim. I will also present it here in the presentation again for people being here. Another aspect was basically to automate this kind of test. So because the one we did now was more or less manually. So we looked into certain core email clients to make sure it works or how it looks. And I can say I have some agreement from a company in Germany that they will borrow us their automated email testing account with a commercial service here, something that was proposed in Dublin, and will help us out on that. We didn't yet set this up, but we will set it up, I think, before the Madrid meeting. Okay, next slide, please. So these are the points I think we probably go through shortly, iterating some of them from the interim and maybe, putting a nail on them, and also discussing some things we didn't get to in the interim, right? Next slide, please. Okay, so for the vocabularies, we shortly discussed in the interim that it might make sense to actually have an IANA registry here. There were two related questions. So first of all, should we have an IANA registry at all? And I think it makes sense to that respect that whereas the draft recommends schema.org as a base source for certain things you want to annotate in an email, schema.org is still limited in terms of what you can describe. I mean, it's basically focused on web search things, so things you can find on the web. That's very much general purpose stuff. There is like books, restaurants, songs. So there's a lot of daily stuff people do with, but there are still things you could want to send as a structured email thing which are not included to that, which is why in the core draft we allow people to basically bring their own models, propose own vocabularies here. And I think it would make sense in order for email clients, either from a sending side or receiving side, to have a registry where they can go to find out more about these vocabularies used. Yeah, I think that was, at least in the interim, also conceived as a good idea. There is a second aspect, and that aspect is basically, so for instance, that registry would include schema.org, and schema.org has its own documentation site. So that would be basically a reference. So you see here a template proposal for that registry. But there might be some vocabularies for which such a website doesn't exist. And in particular, I'm talking about those vocabularies which we define here within the working group. So the charter allows us to do vocabularies which are email specific within the working group, such as the structured vacation notice. And the question is, where and how would we document the structured vacation notice? Obviously, it would be in the draft somehow, but the draft is not necessarily a good reference for the data model itself. Yeah. So usually in a vocabulary definition, you have something like a browsable catalog of the concepts as an own artifact. And so the question was actually if this is possible as part of an IANA registry. And I tried actually this week to find out. I'm not yet done. So the question is basically, what technically can you host as a document on an IANA registry? So you might know in the media type registry, there is like textual templates which are hosted for each media type, like text files. And I was just wondering, could IANA registry propose an arbitrary HTML page, for instance, for describing a certain concept from a vocabulary? And I think IANA people were in general, helpful and trying to understand what I mean. But they asked me kindly to get to the IANA mail address to help them figure out. So I'm still in the process of getting into that, but that might be helpful, at least for some of those, especially for the vocabulary which we want to do for email-related topics. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have comments. Andy?
Yeah, Andy Newton, this is a non-AD type thing. Are these just namespaces, or are they actually meant to be resolved?
Sorry, I didn't get the second part of the question.
Are these just namespace identifiers, or are they actually meant to be resolved? Like, is someone supposed to go to sml.iana.org and retrieve something?
So actually, if you look, that's a very interesting question. So actually, in the linked data environment where this comes from, that's actually in theory possible, but it's not necessarily, let's say, required to do so. Yeah. So it's called linked data because you could in theory do that or try that, but it's not saying like it must be like that.
Okay. I believe in the URN namespace. There's an IETF namespace or something in there. You might want to think about that as opposed to putting it in IANA.org. So
instead of, or when doing it in IANA?
Instead of.
Okay.
I mean, there's precedent for it. So but I don't think we resolve IETF URNs. But so if it's not meant to be resolved, then maybe it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Ben?
I just checked, and it seems like the schema.org website is open source. It's on GitHub. So one possibility would be that we set up a website which is exactly like schema.org, but for IANA. It could either be literally this SML IANA.org if IANA is willing to delegate that host name to somebody, we could host a website there which has a schema.org software behind it. That's just one option. And that would allow us to basically define new types in a nice UI, because I think the IANA, like this with tables and so on, it gets quite complicated, and it's nice to have some kind of web software where we can just add types and make a lower barrier of entry. And we could put the types that we define on there, and we can also optionally import types from schema.org and say these are the ones that you recommended to use in emails, and they have this and this meaning.
Right. Just as a very brief clarification, so that sml.iana.org is just here for brevity. It could very well be www.iana.org assignments / something or so.
Yeah, I commented on this. Yeah, it's going to be a registry on iana.org as opposed to subdomain.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's another thing to ask, but I suspect that it's much easier for them to have a registry.
I was not even asking them if I
Okay.
can do a subdomain. I mean,
Right.
it's just here in the presentation. So
Okay,
it's
Pete.
And I mean, don't underestimate what could be done at IANA. At IANA, you have the time zone database that is downloadable, and they keep all of that information. And I mean, that was a big one to set up because there's all sorts of other things going on with that. IANA can do all sorts of things if you have data that they need to keep track of, and figure out what you need to do, bring it to them. And if they say, no, that's too much for us, okay, come up with a different solution, but figure out what you need first, and exactly the details of what you're going to have to download from some website. They may be able to do it.
Okay, I'm going to proxy John Clancy here by saying, if you ask for a very complicated thing, IANA will ask for more money to manage these things, which is probably true to some extent. So it's not a reason not to ask, but I think about what you're really asking, what how necessary it is, what other choices are. So, okay, Wes.
Thanks. Wes Hardiker, USC, ISI, and the ICANN board, ironically, but speaking only for myself. I actually had a discussion with IANA this week because I was bringing them a particularly complex case, and I said, do you hate it when we do this? Because, there was rules that they were going to have to follow. It's like, well, if, the standards level is this, then only these values are allowed and all that kind of stuff. Their advice to me was make it crystal clear what they should be doing. They can have tables of almost anything. I mean, everybody is right.
Table site easy.
Yeah. So the thing that you want to do is make it so easy that their job, is they can just follow a flow chart or something, so they know when they're adding stuff, this is what they need to do. It's the ambiguous or things that they have to manually read the sentences that we wrote, and we're trying to figure out how we can change it to make it easier so that they can't make a mistake. I would do the same thing here. Right. And go talk to them. They're actually.
I did already also.
Good.
But they told me to go also to the mailing list, to their email address.
Right. Thank you. Ben?
So looking at schema.org, their data is actually in a single JSON LD file, which is a simple JSON file, which could maybe, if you wrangle it, actually, because it's linked data, it's just a triple store, right? So if you really, really, really wanted to, you could express it as a table with 3 columns. And that would be your registration, and then we can read from that and process that further. So that would be the absolute minimum. If you really wanted to put it in a IANA table, would be make a triple store out of the table and then read from there.
I think on that means of just commenting that on that means of representation, I think it might be a good idea to also try reuse or be similar to the visual representation of schema.org, because this is a reference many people might know. So I think that's a good point. To what I understand, the way schema.org currently works is they generate static HTML pages from these input data. So I think, at least from what I understood from IANA, that could at least also be the minimum viable process, because if you would deliver static files, I don't see where that would be much different from text files, which they already deal with. Otherwise, if there would be a complex generation going underneath, again, I would think that might end up with what Alexei said. They need some 2 additional people to manage all that. So, and I'm not sure if that would bring us any benefit, but yeah.
As a chair of the newly minted IANA BIS, you might want to keep an eye on what's going over there, because we're about to update the documents that control creation of registries and whatnot.
Okay, so there's a working group IANA BIS, or it's a draft?
There is. Yes. There's a word, yeah.
I wasn't aware.
It has 2 drafts.
Okay.
Like they're going to change 8126 to bring it, make it, to modernize it.
Okay.
I don't know if that affects what you're talking about, but
Okay.
it will limit, well, I shouldn't say limit. It will update the way that you describe a new thing, and it may put constraints on there you want to be aware of. So just keep it.
Okay, good point. Thank you. All right.
Moving on.
I think so, yeah. All right. So there was a question actually which came up after the Dublin meeting, which is about basically, yeah, what dirty things and complex things can you do with MIME? Yeah. And while I think in practice, like maybe some 80% of the mails, especially the ones we receive, will be, either just plain text or plain HTML, or if they are multi-part, there will be any sort of either one multi-part alternative with text plain, text HTML, maybe having some multi-part related wrapped into that if there is inline images, these kind of things. But so the argument is the majority of emails is pretty much similar, or you find a whole big level of homogeneity. However, if you look deeper, I mean, there's all sorts of things that you can do basically, and which tools sometimes do. And the initial, the initial section in this core draft that was written in terms of how should an email client determine the machine readable data for a certain part was a little bit under the assumption of this, majority of cases. We found out in discussions that these other cases might also exist and somehow should be considered, of course, in the documentation, at least as a guidance for clients, like how to deal with that. And taking it practically, one idea was basically there might be use cases where a client might want to determine if the email is fully in total machine readable. And so that assumption, for instance, is the case if the email is multi-part alternative, and the multi-part alternative would have a text, HTML, human readable, and that machine readable part. So an email client could conclude if it is able to represent machine readable information, it can totally dismiss the human readable part. But as soon as you might have multiple multi-part alternative, or a multi-part alternative and a multi-part related, which are in distinct parts of the MIME tree, this might not be decidable so easy anymore for an email client, or we might at least probably provide some guidance for that particular case. Because you might have sent multiple machine readable parts within that email, and you might want to rule out that there is any human readable part somewhere. So that's basically the first implication I have here. And so the current wording in the draft, actually, to that extent, is also a little bit misleading, because it says like, for instance, an email message should contain a text plain and a text HTML version if there is a machine readable part. But the wording should not be the email message itself, but the body part, which is actually machine readable. I think that would be much clearer wording here. Or the corresponding body what is a suggestion. I actually think this is not really controversial, because it's just misleading in the current spec. But I'm happy to take comments on that.
Okay, sounds good. Fix it.
All right. Next slide, then, please. Yeah. Okay, so this is basically the table I was telling you from in the beginning. So people ask, if we add machine readable part to that email, will it break existing email clients and web mailers? And we basically did a manual test of 3 different flavors here. So you have basically on the very left and on the very right side, you have what we call in the draft the full representation and the partial representation part. So structured data wrapped into either multi-part alternative and a multi-part related. In the middle, you have basically the multi-part alternative thing with the JSON LD, not at the very end, but in the middle of the sequence of multi-line parts. Why is that? This is basically because there is, I think, AMP mail by Google, which is also using a multi-part representation of, an AMP version of an email, and they are basically specifying you should do this AMP part in the middle of the email because it breaks some clients. And this, of course, is against a little bit what is said in the respective RFC of multi-part alternative, because there it says the most specific media type should be at the very end. So it's in that way somehow violating the spec.
I think preferred rendering.
Or preferred.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it turned out, I think, or somebody, I think, in Dublin knew that this was due to behavior of the Apple Mail client. So already in the Dublin meeting, which had problems with that, different multipart or unknown multipart alternative at the very end of the multipart alternative list. But already in Dublin, I think Apple people said that this is no more a problem. And yeah, so we tried it out, and you see here, nothing breaks dramatically. So the test case is basically here, you send a mail with a machine readable part, and the question is, will it still show the text HTML as it is supposed to be? Because none of these clients currently is obviously understanding the machine readable part. Yeah? And the green checkbox basically means the text HTML or the text plain part is probably shown to the user, so the user will not get confused by some gibberish outcome of the structured data in that email. Means we don't fundamentally break legacy clients, or at least the legacy clients listed here, when we start sending or putting structured data within those emails. Annotation to that, you see that a little symbol there. So that means in some cases, actually, the clients will, if that structured data is in the multipart alternative or multipart related, will actually show that as an attachment to the mail, or will convert it visually to an attachment, which in some cases might, of course, considered a little flaw or to confuse users. So I think as part of this working groups, we should at least probably advise these clients to probably not do that, because these information in most cases, I mean, there's also some arguments against that, but if you have a text HTML and a text plain in a regular multipart alternative right now, the email client also won't show you the multipart HTML as an attachment if you are in the multipart plain text there, right? That's not the intended behavior of that. And probably the behavior should be similar for the machine readable parts. It means it shouldn't be shown as an attachment. Therefore, so one suggestion here would probably be, or we already tried actually in that experiment, to have a content disposition inline here, but that didn't help actually in suppressing that in most cases.
Clarifying question and about last column, multipart related with 3 parts. What do you mean? Multipart related has reference to the main node and then can have other. So you just have, which one is the main node in this? Which type?
I think it was actually a multipart alternatives and wrapped into the multipart related, and there would be images or inline stuff as well. I need to look into this.
But multipart related designate a root part to render. So was it HTML?
I think it was a multipart alternative again, because in the
no, you can have multipart alternative inside multipart related.
Okay, to be honest, I don't know by heart right now that you ask. I need to check it out. I don't remember.
Okay, okay.
It's a good question.
Until you clarify, the last column is unclear. Basically,
it's a good question. I'm confused by my own slide here.
Okay,
fine. But normally it's the same as images, right? So you would have multipart related. The main node is the multipart alternative, and then the image is the related part. And I'm assuming that you did the same here. I guess that would be the only logical way.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah. So the idea is that this is a partial representation case, of course. Yeah, I mean, so I know what we intended to do here, but I don't know specifically how we designed the MIME tree actually. So I don't want to tell you anything wrong here. Yeah. Okay. I'll provide a clarification on the list and maybe even an updated check in case there was something wrong with that. All right.
And of course, depending on whether you use multi-party alternative inside multi-party related, showing JSON-LD as attachment seems perfect sense inside multi-party related potentially. So again, that some of yeah. Please clarify.
Okay.
Are we done with this?
Yep. Okay, so this is more or less the conclusion from that and what I already said. So that would be probably encouraging client to do a content disposition or to respect a content disposition inline. So for instance, I looked into the Roundcube webmail source code, and basically if they find any multi-part alternative which is not text plain or text HTML, so actually that would even apply to iCalendar multi-part alternative, which are quite common. They will always be shown as an attachment. Michael?
Yep.
Should we write a short RFC that says the second point?
It's a question if it's...
And just, here's like a 2-page RFC that says, if you weren't doing this, you should do this. And we could at least complain to our providers and go, you're not RFC 9000, 2000, whatever compliant, please fix it. Because we have this problem forever with, PGP signatures, right?
Yeah. That's actually that's what I'm referring to, this auto processing draft. So if it's basically a technical question, if you want to single out this, if you want to make this part of this draft or do it separately.
Yeah, I'm just saying it might be worth having a 2-page RFC that just says that point.
And actually,
if only to be able to beat people over the head quite clearly without them getting lost in the rest of SML.
And actually, now that you mention it, I was talking yesterday to Hans York saying that content disposition probably need to be clarified in a few cases. So it can be slightly bigger than that, but maybe it's worth doing anyway. Yeah.
All right, 3.5 pages.
Okay.
Yeah.
Love it.
But it would probably rather be a main thing then, right?
Do you want me to start that? Because I don't know what to put in it, but I'll edit it.
Let's talk about it.
All right. Okay, if there's no more, I think that was just a follow-up of the other slide. Okay, further open issues from the placement. So let me... okay, so there's one question actually. So there might be cases where deliberately you will just compose emails which go to a human user. So let's say you just use email as a means to talk to between two automated systems. So the question is here, should we require for those cases also to have a text HTML and a text plain in that, which is somehow irrelevant? So the question would be if we should have one word in the draft also allowing just mere application JSON-LD as a root media type for a message if it's just including structured data for these cases, in order to not complicate things for that kind of use case. So yeah.
I, for one, welcome our AI overlords and encourage them to use email.
Okay.
And not to auto-generate HTML in addition to JSON-LD. Yeah, so my reaction, again, as a participant, not as a chair. Not prohibited by email now, so I think that makes sense. I think if you want to make it explicit, have informative text in the document saying, remember, this is still allowed, and for it might be explain the use cases a bit. If it's as you say, service to service, then you don't need to wrap it in multi-part alternative.
Right.
If you're targeting users, obviously it's better if you do. So
okay. All right. Second point, it's probably something we at this point don't need to fully come to a conclusion, because this is actually an ongoing discussion also in the trust draft. So there was discussion actually. So we have a separate draft on trust of structured data and structured email. There were some arguments here where, while you have things like SMIME signatures and so on, that there might be cases where you won't just use as a source of trust probably an SMIME signature, but you might want to be able to sign the structured data by itself, irrespective of the email, either due to the fact that you don't have control about the full email, or you want to have the structured data traveling further out of the email context still to be analyzed or validated for trustworthiness. So one of the ideas that came up probably was something like JWS signatures, which is an own IRC, which would change actually the media type. And so we would need to change the wording here. There is actually other means of providing validation in JSON LD, for instance, used in the verifiable credentials context, which would actually not change the media type because they are part of the structured data. So I think this is probably an open discussion still to have on the trust draft, but I would still keep it in mind here that at some point, if there would be such a solution changing the media type, we might need to change the wording for email clients, which kind of media types to consider that might contain structured data, because it might not just be application LD plus JSON, but something like a JSON signed version, which changes the media type. Okay. Another question that came up is basically for the full representation case, meaning like, there is just a machine readable part of the email where the client could just render that to the user. There is an issue in some legislations. Actually, it's mandatory to have like something like an imprint or, a description of who sends that message to be displayed to the user. So like the email signature in a way, like this was from acme.corporation sending that email. So the problem we would have here, if we would have full representation of the structured data and that would not include this kind of information, it might be legally problematic if the email client would just display it like that without knowing who is the originator of that message. Even though, I mean, the signature might be in the text HTML part, but obviously the idea in that full representation case is that you want to ignore the HTML part. So you actually need a representation of that signature also somehow in the machine reader part. So that leads to the question, basically, if we need something like minimum markup somehow representing what is an email signature right now. Like who is the originator of that email, not just in terms of the sending address, which obviously is in the header, but in the means of a formal legal descriptor. Like this is I think it's mostly an organizational use case, because at least by German laws, this is required for organizations who are sending emails. But maybe it might also apply to persons in some areas. So any opinions on that?
Not entirely sure about the last proposal. I think make a proposal and we'll see, because like, I mean, in my organization, we use SMIME more heavily. So for me, the answer is, of course, SMIME.
So I didn't get that point. Well, how does it relate to SMIME? Yeah.
SMIME signature. No, is it?
No, it's not. Sorry. Okay, so this is not signature, cryptographic signature. So this is email signature as the thing you define in Outlook, like the footer. Sorry, the footer.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay,
yeah,
you got me very confused.
Okay.
All right.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, that's my fault. Yeah. I mean, the confidential thing probably. I'm not even sure if this is legally required. Yeah.
Oh.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay, maybe. Again, send the email to the mailing list.
Okay.
And it's probably easy if you send a separate, email specifically on this.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Next slide. Okay, then we had a discussion in Dublin about for the case of partial representation, meaning you still want to render HTML email to the user, maybe because it's a newsletter which is specifically designed in a fancy way, and you don't want just to have the email client have a fully automated representation of that, but you want to have structured data as an additional annotation that helps the email client understand what's going on in the HTML email. So the example used here is, for instance, the New York Times. They have a couple of newsletters, like cooking newsletters, which tell you about all the kind of nice recipes you have around. But the only thing you have inside is a URL to go to their website. But it might be neat if the email client could understand, or so if the sender could basically also pass a structured data representation of that recipe, which even exists on their website already in the annotations. So the structured data is even there already. So you could put that in the email so that the email client could allow you as a user to either to render it in an additional way or to proceed further with that recipe on a local application or something like that, where you collect recipes or stuff like that. So the question here basically was, in the case of rendering that as an HTML email, it might be neat for the email client to understand that this particular link for sheet pan chopped salad with chicken is basically referring to a particular entity in the structured data, and how would that reference would look like. So the suggestion initially was to use the data ID attribute on the link in the HTML part of the email. There was some discussion or proposal in Dublin actually to use content ID references here, and I think we had a mail on the list, and I had a small exchange also with John Levine, who was one of the people proposing or suggesting that, what was actually a good idea to look into it. The problem is actually, if you would use content ID here, you couldn't use a full URI as a fragment for the item within the content part, because this is disallowed by the URI RC here. So the question is a little bit if we can still maybe fall back or just use the initial proposal. What we would lose here is actually the information about from which content, content ID or body part this stems from. But the question is if this really matters in the case, because in the case of structured email, basically you could expect the client to, analyze all structured data out of an email beforehand anyway, irrespective of which content type it was coming from. So we could be just fine with that probably, because it would be up to the email client to do the correlation. Yeah.
Okay, can you explain the problem with content ID again?
So if you would use a content ID, the content ID would be something like an arbitrary. So the JSON LD on the right hand side, it would have a content ID in the email body part, right? So, but what we want to reference here is not the full thing, but
it's
something inside the content, the body part is especially like the ID there, right? So the idea is then you could use a fragment, like the hash, but the ID typically in JSON LD is an ERI or URI, as you see on the right side, which again is not allowed as a fragment. You cannot use a full URI as a fragment because I think the slash is disallowed or so.
You can encode if you want to, but also, as far as I remember, fragment definition on syntax for fragment is media type specific. It's not protocol specific. So actually you can say for JSON ID, the fragment is.
I mean, yep. Maybe
this is one of the interesting quirks being of media type expert. I'm fragment ID is media type specific.
I mean, we can take that on the list again. I looked into it. I think we probably John remembers, because I think we sent around some links on that.
Yeah, this is John. The syntax of the fragment is defined as in the URI draft, and it basically has to be letters and digits. The semantics of how you resolve that fragment ID to something inside the object, that is media type specific, but you definitely can't include, I forget whether it's colons or slashes or something, but like
but we can encode, right? Like percent encoding is still fine. I know it's ugly, but I'm just
I suppose it sounds like one of those things that's a horrible idea, but it might be less horrible than the alternatives.
Okay. Yeah, sorry for not paying attention on the mailing list.
Oh, fine. Yeah.
So maybe we can experiment a little bit more on this.
All right. Okay.
Ben?
Is there an actual reason why we should do the CID? Because as a mail client, the CID would actually might make life harder for me. Because right now, what I would do is I either already read the structured data and I have it available as something attached to the email, but then it's no longer part of a MIME parb. It's just the information that I have there as structured data. So having the CID there would actually make life harder for me, because then I would need to track of which part of the data came from which content part, which actually structurally, semantically is now completely irrelevant, doesn't matter, because we're just expressing information. The information is expressed in SML way, a linked data way. What do we need it for? Why would we do that? Because it would make life harder to make it specific to content type than make it easier.
Actually, I think hopefully having counter argument, and I'm being a little bit of devil's advocate here, but if you use CID URL, you're saying that information comes from another body part of the same message. So if you don't, like HTTPS URI, this can actually trigger all kinds of restrictions if you don't want to access external resources. So, you know, like various email clients have, you know, just display external, allow external links and allow external images, this sort of thing. So I think we need to think a bit more about this.
I think I know what you're saying. That would apply only to parsers that take any URL in any property and take it out.
Which some generic parsers might do just for because if they don't recognize it, they might just do it, you know, to sanitize stuff. Yeah.
So I'm aware. I've wrote one of those. But most of them are specific to a property. So if that is a concern, you can put anything else in front of the URL to make it not look like a URL anymore. But what I'm saying is making specific to a MIME part and requiring this MIME part. That's the part that makes my life easier. For the record, handling CIDs was extremely difficult, even for images for me.
I think actually both of you have a point here. So in my opinion, I mean, the concern that Alexei is raising is somehow valid. So this is less specific in a way. I think most email clients will actually currently just rip this off. I mean, I'm pretty sure no email client will act in any way based on that, because it's anyway in the attribute. So you won't even see it as a user, and so will be, I bet money on it. There's nothing that will happen. So in any case, we would, as part of the spec, we would tell email clients to not anymore strip that out, but use it in a very particular way, in which we say don't resolve that, but just look up if there is an ID in the structured data, you extract it in a separate step, and if not, just ignore it. But I agree with you that that might be a more complex explanation, or maybe some people might implement that in comparison to having a CID thing, right? On the other hand, you can say this even has a benefit, because if you would, you know, for example, archives that HTML or so outside of the email context, you might still make the inference to that concept from another source, because this is actually supposed to be a conceptual IRI of the concept, right? But that's another kind of argument.
Okay,
Pete Resnick, I think you may be overestimating how certain email clients are written. That you know.
No, who?
Oh, you.
Okay.
No, yeah. I'll point. No, Hans Jorg. I think some of that stripping is done pretty darn blindly across the entire message, and I think it is more likely that content ID code is factored in some interesting way, because people have to do things like display inline images and feed to other machinery as part of the HTML. So I would review with client writers first before you go making assumptions that using real URLs is a good idea.
But the concern Alexei raised was that clients will actually call that URI. Do you really think they will do?
Well, actually, I was thinking about both. Either blocking because it's a URL, even if it's in a place it doesn't understand, or stripping it. It's very common as well, and then you lose the information.
And you know, I'm thinking about you know, the Bitdefender tools that go ripping things out of messages as a service, and you know, as much as you can keep them from doing dumb things is probably good.
Okay.
If it looks like URL, if it walks like a URL, it is a
Exactly.
URL.
Okay. So just to rephrase, I think, so in that sense, your point would even apply, it would be a little bit in favor of the encoding thing, which Alexei said, even though the client might still understand the encoding and deal with
Although I think content IDs tend to be well understood by everybody at this point.
But still, we would have the URL, because URL typically is a really ID in the structured data, and we cannot change that. So we would, even in the content ID case, we would have that as a right-hand part of the hash.
Yeah, might be. Or
and we might get into trouble based on what you said, right?
It's conceivable. Although I think more likely if it appears in HTML than if it appears someplace else. You know, looking for beginning of HTML data, strip, end of HTML data. Okay, I go back to not stripping. But yeah,
all right.
Okay. Ben?
So that actually makes a point, because I always was confused by, I know it's a common in linked data to use URLs with HTTPS as an identifier. I've always been confused because I always think this is a web page. But is this part of schema.org that you absolutely have to use HTTPS URLs? Because the simple fix would be to just not use HTTPS URLs. You might still use a domain, but to put something else in front of it or nothing. And
it's
then
a JSON linked data spec.
So it has to be like this.
If we want to be conformant with JSON LE, yes.
Too bad, yeah. Because I thought that is actually the real thing that's causing the problem here.
All right.
Okay, so I think lots of good points. This we'll need to discuss more.
Right. Okay. Can you enable the timer again, actually, or how much time do we have? Actually, I have no idea. 3. Really?
9 minutes.
Okay, 9 minutes. But anyway, I think that's one of the last slides already, even though that might be a controversial one.
Just throw grenades so everybody awake, and then we can think about it for a bit.
All right. So imagine the flight itinerary use case. So you get a flight reservation by email in structured data. Let's say that structured data is somehow malformed, whatever kind of stuff. You would never want to reply to that, to tell the sender that it's broken, at least not in whatever automatic way or so, because it could be a spammer or so, right? But now say that email would allow you to send a structured response to that airline saying you confirm the flight or something like that, right? So you send a structured email in response to the structured data you've been receiving with your email client, right? But now imagine, there might be reasons why the recipient, so the airline, will not be able to process your response. First of all, your email client might be broken, so you send a syntactically broken confirmation of the flight. So in that case, you might want to have a response by the airline that says, okay, actually your transaction didn't go through. There was an error in your confirmation, right? Otherwise, you would just assume that it was happening. Also, the state could be wrong, right? You might have confirmed a flight that was in the meantime canceled or something like that. So the airline might again want to signal that to you back, right? In any case, it might want to, it could signal it back, of course, in the human readable part, but we might also want to think about, since we are dealing with structured email, to have kind of a structured response, right? So stuff like that exists already on a system layer. So if you look at the DSN specs or RFC 3463, there's quite a lot of distinction in terms of different error cases that might happen on a system level with messages you are sending to a certain destination. But the question is if that would be, one could just extend that, right? And say we put there in an additional kind of error codes in there, but that would be just another, it would go away a little bit from the modeling we have in SML in a way. So the question would be just stay in structured data also for these structured data related error cases. And yeah, as I said here, there might be quite a number of those cases, like a syntactical error, a semantic error, a process error, something like that. And so the question is basically, that was in the draft as a category, but it was never really fleshed out so far. So I think we need here, there's no pre-existing modeling as far as I'm aware, like in schema.org or something like that. So we would probably need something here like structured data representation of an email action arrow or something like that. Which then the client that was confirming the flight could basically process and feedback that information to you in the situation.
My personal pathology with some of this kind of stuff, because I, don't use email programs. I don't use email system that just archives everything. I actually delete it. And so my personal pathology is I reply to the email, say, yes, I'm confirming my flight. It says, no, you're stupid and blah, 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 or that's delayed. And then I'm like, oh, but I don't have the email again. Now I don't have the thing to fix, like the text plain or text HTML where I could actually have clicked on the part where I could then sort it through manually. So I'm totally in favor of what you just said, that they would respond again. And I actually think they should essentially say, Knack, I didn't understand you. Here's the thing I wanted to tell you with the new status and then the new, process. And, we can go back and forth as many times until I figure out, or I just finally figure out that your system's broken. I'm trying to confirm my flight, but you keep giving me an error. Okay. So, or something, right? So yeah, we need to do that. And I think the advice should be essentially, I didn't understand you. I'll tell you again and then, I hope there's not two robots talking to each other at that point, right? So you might need a loop counter in there too.
All right.
Okay. That's it. That's it.
Oh, we haven't. Were we done with the previous point? I don't know if there were no further. So what is the conclusion of the point, basically? I mean,
I think Michael said
we make a
plus one. Yeah, make a proposal
okay.
and see.
Okay. All right, so there's one more, I forgot about it. That's basically also already in the draft. It's updates of structured data. So what happens if the flight is rescheduled, for instance? Point is here, if there is a human readable email, it can just say, okay, your flight was rescheduled. But how do we basically teach the email client for structured data that the previous version of the structured data is no more relevant, either because it was updated, maybe because it was deleted. So there was an initial proposal, I think it was by Arndt, to reuse the supersedes header here, which I think we somehow also touched yesterday in the main session for another reason. I think there was a little bit of a, in the main discussion, it was a little bit different, but here the idea would probably be that the supersedes header in the context of SML would basically tell the client that, first of all, it would only be valid by the same sender and probably in the same thread. Yeah, so referencing the initial message ID. And if it would be set, it would basically set, as a client, probably try to reset all the structured data that was already, extracted from the initial mail in this thread and replace it with the structured data, which is either be completely resent now in an updated version, or it is empty set, which would basically mean remove it. Yeah. So that would be the current suggestion here. There's of course different other ways you could do it. So you could design, a piece of structured data that basically says, okay, this is a delete operation or an update operation kind of thing. So you could put that on the semantic level of the modeling. Yeah.
Expires yesterday.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So what is people's opinion on that? I mean, is the supersedes thing fine? I think we never got to discussing that in the.
I think it's fine as long as we can explain the security constraint and when. But they're generic things for how you handle supersedes anyway.
I mean, one of the points was also like the supersedes thing, I think is a very oldish one. So the question is still, does it make sense to pick it up, or should one rather do a new thing anyway or so? That could also.
Okay, I have it implemented in our webmail, so we have superseded. But again,
Okay.
I did it because it matches semantic right away. So
okay,
I don't think there is a need to reinvent, but
Ben?
So if you're asking for opinion, I think this is good and necessary. If you're thinking of typical use cases, like I'm getting the updates for a parcel that is about to be delivered and it's delivered in 1 hour and it has been delivered, and so this is basically about the same thing, just updates to it. So that would express that. That makes sense. And I think that makes sense. I would be careful with deletion, but otherwise, I think that's very useful.
Okay.
I would just maybe put it somewhere not in the header, maybe. I don't know, but okay.
But that was a supersedes header lives, right?
Yeah, but then you lose the connection between the semantic data and the you have to make a connection between an email header and the semantic data, and these are different things. That's why just my thinking. But
I'm not sure if we need two things, but maybe we, there are use cases. Okay, I think we're just at the end of the session, so need to think a bit more. As a generic message level, I think, try to supersede it and see what happens on the mailing list with the discussion. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you, Hans-Jörg, for standing at the mic.
All right, thank you.
And entertaining us for the last almost hour and a half. Okay, see you next time.
Have a good way home. Thank you.
I deliberately avoided this question because this particular chair is so overloaded. So, I mean, I would rather this come from the community and saying, yes, we absolutely really need to have interims. And
anyways, a break till the Madrid meeting is not as long as it was now between Dublin and here. So we can probably see ad hoc in terms of how we proceed with the changes from today, if it makes sense to have maybe one interim at some point, right? I would agree. Probably one would be good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. In a couple of months, I think that's probably sensible.
Maybe in the middle between both.
If we
of
make
course,
it
you can revise as many draft as many times as you like. So,
if you make interim meetings, it would be useful to make a reminder a week before or a day before to remind people. I think that helps attendance.
Yes.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.